Call came at 6:47 in the morning, and I knew before I even picked up that it wasn't good news. My sister never called before noon unless something was wrong or she needed something. That morning, it was both. Mom's planning the anniversary party, she said, skipping hello entirely. 50 years. We're doing it at the Harrington Club. I knew the Harrington Club. Oak paneling, white tablecloths, the kind of place where you paid $200 a plate and smiled like it was normal. My parents had been members for 30 years. I had eaten exactly 4 meals there in my life, all of them uncomfortable. Okay, I said. When? Third Saturday of next month. We need you to come, obviously. She paused. But Mum wants to keep it elegant. Understated. You know how she is. I did know how she was. I had spent 31 years learning exactly how she was. What my sister didn't say, and what I already knew she would eventually get around to saying, was that understated and elegant had never included me. Not really. Not in any way that counted. I should tell you something about my family first, because none of what comes later makes sense without it. My father built a commercial real estate firm from one rented office in downtown Cincinnati into something that now employs over 200 people and manages properties in 6 states. He is the kind of man who believes that success is a language, and that if you are not fluent in it, you have nothing useful to say. My mother comes from old Tennessee money, not the flashy kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that expresses itself through the right neighborhood and the right club and the right daughter who married a physician and drives a car that costs more than most people's annual salary. That daughter is my sister Rebecca, and then there is me. My name is Sloane. I am the younger one by 4 years, the one who showed up at Thanksgiving in scrubs more than once, because I had come straight from a shift. The one who chose emergency medicine over the kind of specialty that would have impressed people at the Harrington Club. I did my residency at a level I trauma center in Memphis. I have worked nights that I will never be able to fully describe to people who weren't there. I have held pressure on wounds with my bare hands. I have talked families through the worst 30 seconds of their lives in a hallway under fluorescent light. None of that ever translated into the currency my family understood. It wasn't that they were cruel exactly. My father was not the kind of man who said unkind things directly. He preferred a subtler method, the slight pause before answering when someone asked what his daughters did, the way he would say Sloane is in medicine and move on quickly, as if the specifics were embarrassing. My mother expressed her feelings through logistics. She simply arranged things in ways that communicated what she couldn't bring herself to say out loud, like the holiday photos. For years, every Christmas, there was a family photo taken at the house, the kind that got turned into cards and sent to 100 people. For the last 3 years, Rebecca and her husband Thomas and their 2 children had been front and center. I had been in every photo technically, but I was always slightly to the side, slightly behind someone's shoulder. Once I looked at the card and realized I was half obscured by a pine bough decoration. I had told myself I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. The anniversary party invitation arrived in the mail. Actual paper, actually mailed, 2.5 weeks before the event. I stood in the driveway in my pajamas and opened it and read it twice. My parents' names, Rebecca and Thomas as hosting family. The date, the time, the address. My name was not on it. I called Rebecca back that afternoon. The invitation, I said. It lists you and Thomas as the family hosts. Well, you're so busy, she said. And her voice had that particular quality it got when she was delivering something she knew I wouldn't like wrapped inside something that sounded reasonable. We didn't want to put pressure on you. You work all those crazy hours. I'm coming, I said. Obviously I'm coming. It's Mom and Dad's 50th anniversary. Of course. Yes, of course you're coming. Another pause. Mom just thought it might be better if you didn't. She doesn't want the focus to be on anything other than the celebration. She thought if people knew you were coming, they might ask about your work, and you know how you get when people ask about the ER. She just wants it to be a positive evening. You know how you get. As if talking about my work, about medicine, about something real was a social liability, as if I was the problem in that equation. I didn't say any of that. I said, I'll be there, and I hung up. I want to be honest about what happened next because I think it matters. I didn't make some dramatic decision. I didn't plan anything. I sat on my kitchen floor for a while. I don't know how long, maybe 20 minutes. And I thought about every version of myself I had ever tried to be for them, and I thought about the fact that none of those versions had ever been enough. And then I went to work, because I had a 12-hour shift starting at 7, and 2 people needed surgery before midnight, and the world doesn't pause for family feelings. I didn't tell anyone about the invitation, not my co-workers. Not my best friend Pryor, who knew me since medical school and who would have said something sharp and accurate that I wasn't ready to hear. I didn't tell my attending, Dr. Kellerman, who had been something of a mentor to me since my residency and who had written one of my letters of recommendation and who occasionally reminded me, in his dry way, that I was better at this job than I gave myself credit for. I just kept working. I kept showing up. That is, ultimately, what I have always done. The week before the party, my mother called me directly, which was unusual. She preferred texts when possible. Brief ones, usually about logistics. I just want to make sure we're on the same page, she said, after the usual pleasantries. About the event. I'll be there, Mom. I know, Your father and I have worked very hard on the guest list, and we have some of his business associates coming, and I want the evening to feel cohesive, polished. Okay, I thought maybe you could come a little later, after the dinner portion. For the dancing, maybe. That way you wouldn't have to sit through all the speeches and it would be easier for everyone. Less what? I wanted to ask. Less what, exactly? I'll be there for dinner, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Sloane, your father has clients coming. People who respect a certain kind of, I'll see you Saturday, Mom. I hung up before she could say anything else, because I had learned, somewhere around age 27, that there is a version of that conversation that goes on forever and ends the same way every time. I drove myself to the Harrington Club on a Saturday evening in October, wearing the blue dress I had bought in Nashville 2 summers ago at a boutique on Church Street. It was a good dress. I had worn it to a colleague's wedding and twice to dinners where I actually felt like myself, which was rare enough that I remembered both occasions specifically. I was not wearing my white coat. I was not carrying anything that announced what I did for a living. I was just a woman in a blue dress driving to her parents' anniversary party, which is the kind of sentence that should be simple and wasn't. The valet stand was outside, and there were already cars lined up when I arrived. BMWs and one Bentley that I assumed belonged to one of my father's older partners. The lobby smelled like flowers and something expensive. A woman at a small table near the entrance had place cards laid out in neat rows. I gave her my name. She looked through the cards once. Then again. I'm sorry, she said, with the practiced smile of someone who deals with these situations regularly. I don't seem to have a card for you. Let me check with the event coordinator. She stepped away. I stood by the table and looked at the place cards still spread out in front of me, and I saw my parents' names and Rebecca's name and Thomas's name and the names of people I had never met, and I understood with a clarity that was almost peaceful that this had not been an oversight. The event coordinator came back with the woman and smiled the same practiced smile. I'm so sorry for the confusion. We do have a seating chart, and it looks like you may not be. We weren't expecting. She's my daughter. My mother appeared from somewhere to my left, wearing the pearl earrings she saved for important occasions. She looked at me the way she sometimes looked at unexpected weather, as if I had arrived without proper warning and she was deciding how to manage it. We'll find her a seat. They put me at a small table near the back of the room. The kind of table that exists in banquet halls for exactly this purpose, for the people who need to be accommodated without being incorporated. I was seated with a cousin of my father's I'd met twice, her husband who said almost nothing, and a business associate's wife who spent most of dinner telling me about her renovation project in Hilton Head. I ate my salmon and smiled and asked the right questions and did not look at the main table more than necessary. The speeches started after dinner. Thomas spoke first, warmly, well prepared, the kind of speech that gets better with rehearsal. Rebecca spoke next, and I watched my mother's face while she listened, and my mother was glowing. Genuinely glowing. She looked the way she always looked when Rebecca was in front of a room, proud in a way that was uncomplicated, unguarded. I had not been asked to speak. I had not been asked to do anything, except, apparently, to sit quietly near the kitchen corridor and eat salmon and not create a scene. The dancing started. The band was good, a six-piece that played standards and a few Frank Sinatra songs my father liked. I watched my parents have their first dance, and I will say this honestly, they looked happy. Whatever else is true about my family, my parents love each other in the way that some people are lucky enough to love each other. Imperfectly but durably. I had gotten up to find some water when I heard my name. Not my name exactly, a question. Excuse me. An older man was standing nearby, mid-70s, silver hair, the careful posture of someone who had spent decades being precise about how he held himself. He was looking at me with an expression I didn't immediately understand. "Are you Dr. Sloane Merritt?" I turned fully toward him. "I am." He exhaled. The specific kind of exhale that happens when something you were uncertain about turns out to be true. "St. Vincent's," he said. "March. 2 years ago." I looked at him more carefully. Something was beginning to come back to me. Not a clear image, but the shape of a night. "My wife," he said. "Carol. She came in by ambulance. Cardiac event. They said if we had waited another 20 minutes." He stopped. The practiced precision in his posture had softened slightly. "You were the one who was there when they brought her in. You stayed. You talked to me in the hallway for I don't know how long. You didn't have to do that. St. Vincent's, March." A woman in her late 60s, brought in by EMS, her husband in the waiting room with his coat still on because he hadn't had time to think about taking it off. "I remember," I said, and I did. Not every detail, but the shape of it, the shape of that hallway, the shape of that particular fear on a particular face. "How is she?" "She's here tonight," he said. "She's dancing." He pointed, and I turned, and there was a woman in a green dress moving carefully with a man I assumed was their son, and she was smiling. "We've known your father for 30 years. When I heard you were his daughter, I needed to find you." He held out his hand. I shook it. "Thank you," he said. "I've said that sentence 1,000 times in the past 2 years, and it still doesn't feel like enough. I don't entirely know how to describe what happened next, except to say that the room changed in some way I can't attribute to anything physical. The music was still the same, the lights were the same, but something in the quality of the air shifted. His name was Arthur Whitfield. He was one of my father's oldest clients, had been for 3 decades, since before I was born. He was also, I would learn later, the person whose business relationship with my father had helped fund the expansion into 3 additional states in 2019. He did not let go of my hand immediately. He turned toward the room. "Gerald," he said, using my father's name, which almost no one did. "Gerald, come here." My father was 15 feet away, talking to someone near the bar. He turned, saw Arthur, and came over with the easy manner of a man who has spent 50 years being comfortable in rooms like this one. Arthur kept my hand in both of his. "Your daughter," he said, "saved my wife's life." My father looked at me. I don't know what he saw. I don't know what 31 years of accumulated decisions look like on a person's face when they're being held accountable for them in a ballroom. I only know what I saw on his, which was something I had not seen before, something that moved underneath the surface of his usual expression and didn't quite resolve into anything nameable. March 2 years ago, Arthur continued. Carol came in, and your daughter was the one who was there. She's the reason Carol is here dancing tonight. My mother had appeared at some point. She was standing slightly behind my father, and she had the pearl earrings on, and she was very still. Arthur turned to the room, not performatively, not dramatically, just with the ease of a man who had been listened to in rooms like this one his entire life, and he said, to no one specifically and everyone generally, I'd like to say something. The band had taken a short break. The timing was coincidental. The room quieted the way rooms do when someone who carries natural authority speaks. Some of you know me, Arthur said. I've been Gerald's client and his friend for most of both our adult lives, and I don't say what I'm about to say lightly. He looked at me. This woman walked into St. Vincent's emergency room on a Tuesday night in March and made every correct decision in the 12 minutes that mattered most. My wife is alive because of her. Someone near the bar started clapping, then someone else. It moved through the room in the way those things sometimes do. Not because anyone was performing anything, but because the thing being acknowledged was real. I stood there in my blue dress with the water glass in my hand, and I did not cry, which surprised me a little. What I felt was something quieter than tears, something that had been waiting a long time to be acknowledged and had grown patient in the waiting. My mother stepped forward. I watched her cross the distance between us, maybe 6 feet, maybe less, and I watched her face as she did it, and I saw something there that I had not seen in a long time. Not the managed warmth she offered at Christmas, not the careful approval she dispensed for the right behavior. Something older than that, something that had been underneath everything else all this time. She put her hand on my arm. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I didn't know. 3 words. Not an apology exactly, not an explanation, but true. I believed they were true, which mattered to me even then. I know, I said. My father was still standing where he had been. He was looking at me in the way I had wanted him to look at me since I was 17 years old, and had told him I wanted to be a doctor, and he had said that was fine, if I wanted to do something safe. Something that wouldn't require me to fight for anything. He came over slowly. He was 68 years old and he had built something real, and I had never stopped being his daughter, even when I was certain he had forgotten that. He put his hand out. I shook it. And then, because he was my father, and because some gestures have to come from somewhere deeper than pride, he pulled me in and held on for a moment, and I let him. Later that night, after the dancing, after Arthur introduced me to Carol in the green dress, after Priya texted me asking why my voice sounded different when I called her from the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long time before I started the engine. I had not planned any of it. I had not worn a white coat or introduced myself or positioned myself anywhere to be seen. I had just shown up in a blue dress to my parents' anniversary party and done the only thing I know how to do, which is be exactly who I am. The drive home was quiet. The highway was mostly empty. Somewhere past the bridge on I-71, it started to rain, and I turned the wipers on and thought about Carol Whitfield dancing in a green dress, and about a Tuesday in March when I had been very tired and a woman had come in by ambulance, and I had made 12 minutes count. I thought about the place card that hadn't been there, the table near the kitchen corridor, the salmon. I thought about my father's hand on my shoulder, and my mother's 3 words. None of it erased the years before it. I want to be clear about that. A moment doesn't undo a pattern, but it can be the first thing that comes after one, and sometimes that is what matters, not the undoing, but the after. I drove home through the rain, and I was 31 years old, and I was a doctor, and I was my parents' daughter, all 3 of those things true at the same time and none of them cancelling out the others. The lights in my apartment were on because I had left them on, and when I walked in, everything was exactly where I had left it, and that felt like enough. There's something nobody tells you about being overlooked by the people who were supposed to see you first. It doesn't arrive like a single blow. It accumulates. A place card that isn't there, a seating chart that puts you near the kitchen corridor, a mother who calls to ask you to come late, as if your presence needed to be rationed. I spent a long time believing that if I just worked harder, achieved more, became undeniable enough, the equation would eventually balance. That is what I told myself through medical school, through residency, through 12-hour shifts, and the particular loneliness of being good at something your family doesn't know how to value. I thought the problem was that I hadn't yet done enough to earn the room. What I understand now is that the problem was never about enough. Arthur Whitfield didn't stand up that night because I had campaigned for his attention. He didn't stop the room because I had positioned myself to be seen. He did it because 2 years earlier, on a Tuesday in March, I had made the only decision available to me, the one my training and my conscience pointed to, and I had not once thought about whether it would be remembered or rewarded. I had just done the work. That is what integrity actually looks like most of the time. Not a grand gesture, just the decision you make when no one is keeping score. I think about that a lot now. The quiet arithmetic of how we spend our effort when we believe no one is watching. Every hour I put into getting better at my job, every difficult case I stayed present for, every family I sat with in a hallway when it would have been easier to pass that off to someone else. None of that was done for the Harrington Club. None of it was done for my father's approval, or my mother's pearl earrings, or a seat at the right table. It was done because the work asked it of me, and I had enough respect for the work to answer. That is the part worth holding on to, not the vindication. Though I will admit, the vindication felt like something. Not my father's hand on my shoulder or my mother's 3 words, though those mattered more than I expected them to. The part worth holding on to is the truth that showed itself that evening, that doing right by the thing you're responsible for is its own complete action. It doesn't require an audience to be real. It doesn't require a family's approval to count. What I've learned, slowly, imperfectly, through more than my share of nights sitting in parked cars trying to make sense of things, is that the people who underestimate you are not the final word on what you're worth. They can arrange the seating chart. They can forget your name on the invitation. They cannot, however, rearrange what you've actually built. The record exists independent of whether they've read it. And there is something to be said for showing up anyway. Not as a performance, not as a statement, but simply because the occasion called for it, and you are someone who shows up. That particular kind of steadiness, the willingness to walk into a room that wasn't sure it wanted you and to be fully yourself inside it, is something that gets built over years of small decisions. It isn't dramatic, it doesn't announce itself, but it is, in the end, the thing that holds. I drove home through the rain that night, and the lights were on in my apartment because I had left them on, and I walked in and I was exactly who I had always been. That turned out to be enough.